Space is full of ghosts. Not the spectral kind that haunt old houses, but the far grander, far more silent ghosts of ambition. Entire civilizations, reduced to drifting boneyards of metal and stone. Silas knew these graveyards better than most. He was a zero-G archaeologist, which was a dignified name for a salvager with a history degree. His ship, the Stargazer, was a small, battered vessel that, much like its captain, had seen better days. For 3 weeks, they had been combing the outer debris field of a system the old charts called Ozymandias, known to men like Silas as the graveyard of giants. The giants, or the architects, as the academics called them, had been dead for 1,000,000 years. They had left behind wreckage on a scale that humbled the mind, twisted spars of megastructures that had once scraped moons, skeletal rings that had encircled entire planets, and the silent, shattered hulls of ships that could swallow cities. Silas was deep in debt, and this was his last roll of the dice. He needed a find, something pristine, something valuable enough to appease the creditors breathing down his neck. He guided the Stargazer's manipulator arms with practiced ease, nudging aside a piece of debris the size of a skyscraper. The scanner's pulse grew stronger, more urgent. It wasn't pointing at the colossal wreckage, but at something small, nestled in the shadow of a fractured support beam. Something dense. Something, intact. He brought the external cameras in for a close-up. There, floating in the void, was an object no larger than a human head. It was a perfect dodecahedron, a 12-sided shape of such flawless geometry that it seemed impossible. Its surface was a deep, non-reflective black, a patch of absolute nothingness that seemed to swallow the light of the distant nebula. A thrill, cold and sharp, cut through his exhaustion. Wreckage was common. But a pristine, undamaged artifact from the architect's core civilization. That was the stuff of legend. With painstaking care, he maneuvered the manipulator arm, its delicate pincers closing around the object. He brought it into the external airlock, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. The find that would change everything. The sphere, he was already calling it the Omen sphere in his head, settled onto the decontamination plate in his small cargo bay. Even under the harsh glare of the bay lights, its facets absorbed all light, revealing nothing. It was like holding a captured piece of the void itself. He ran a gloved hand over its impossibly smooth surface. It was cool to the touch, and strangely inert. For a long moment, Silas simply stared, the sheer, alien perfection of the object silencing the cacophony of his debts and his worries. He was no longer a salvager. He was Howard Carter, staring into Tutankhamun's tomb. He had found his treasure. He had no idea that the treasure had also found him. Back in the cramped cockpit of the Stargazer, Silas plotted a course for the nearest trade hub, a wide grin splitting his face. The Omen sphere was secured in the cargo bay, a silent promise of a new life. He activated the ship's autopilot and allowed himself the luxury of a nutrient-paced meal that, for the first time in months, didn't taste like ash. As the ship hummed through the void, he felt a strange, subtle vibration through the deck plates. Not the familiar groan of his aging vessel, but something new. A low, resonant hum that he dismissed it as a quirk in the inertial dampeners. But then, the lights in the cockpit flickered. The primary navigation screen dissolved into static for a moment before snapping back into focus. Silas, Warden, run a diagnostic. All systems. All systems operating within normal parameters, Silas. Silas, normal. The lights just did a tango. Check the power conduits from the cargo bay. Warden, conduits are stable. There is, however, an anomalous energy reading emanating from the cargo bay. It does not match any known signature. Silas felt a prickle of unease. He left the cockpit and walked to the cargo bay, the hum growing stronger with every step. It wasn't just a sound he was hearing, it was a feeling, a pressure building inside his skull. He opened the door, and the sight within stole his breath. The Omen sphere was no longer inert. It floated a few inches above the deck plate, and the inky blackness of its surface was now traced with intricate, pulsating lines of soft, blue light. The hum was coming from it, a silent song that resonated directly in the bones of his skull. As he watched, mesmerized, the light intensified, and the pressure in his head became a blinding force. The cargo bay vanished. The ship vanished. Silas was standing under a turquoise sky, on a balcony of polished, white stone that overlooked a city of breathtaking beauty. Spires of living crystal pierced the clouds, connected by bridges of woven light. Graceful, impossibly tall beings, the architects, moved with an unhurried elegance through plazas filled with flora that sang with color. He could feel the warmth of a binary sun on his skin, smell the scent of alien blossoms on the gentle breeze. He felt peace. A profound, all-encompassing tranquility he hadn't felt in his entire life. It was a vision, a memory, so real and vivid it felt more authentic than his own past. Silas was on his knees in the cargo bay, gasping for air, his head throbbing. The Omen sphere was dark and silent once more, resting on the deck plate as if nothing had happened. A dream? A hallucination? But the memory of it was burned into his mind, sharp and clear. He stumbled to the cockpit, his hands. Then, just as quickly as it came, it was gone. Warden, show me everything in the historical archives about the architect's home world. Warden, that information is unknown. No verifiable data exists on the architect's planet of origin. It is one of history's greatest mysteries. Silas stared at the star chart, his heart pounding. The data didn't exist. But he had just been there. The sphere wasn't just an artifact. It was a key. A recorder. And he was the first person in a million years to turn it on. The initial fear was now replaced by a feverish excitement. This was bigger than just paying off debts. This was the discovery of the millennium. He had to know more. Over the next few ship cycles, he devoted himself to the sphere, touching it, concentrating. And it responded. It showed him wonders. He saw the architects composing music from starlight, shaping planets with thought, and exploring the cosmos in ships of pure energy. He saw a society without conflict, a civilization that had conquered disease, scarcity, and war. He became addicted to the visions, neglecting his ship, his own needs, losing himself in the beautiful, silent memories of a dead race. He was falling in love with a ghost. He didn't realize that the sphere was showing him what he wanted to see, preparing him for what he needed to see. The change was subtle at first. The visions began to show the architects not just as artists and thinkers, but as scientists. He saw them studying the fundamental forces of the universe, manipulating spacetime, growing ever more ambitious. A hint of hubris began to creep into the perfect peace of the visions. Then, one day, the sphere showed him something new. Something terrible. He was no longer in the city, but in a vast, orbital observatory. The graceful architects were frantic, their movements sharp with panic. On a massive, holographic display that filled the room, a wave was depicted. Not a wave of water or energy, but a wave of nothing. A ripple in the fabric of reality itself, sweeping across the galaxy at an impossible speed. The harmonic cascade, the translated data called it. And then the vision shifted. He was back in the city, but the peace was gone. A silent, invisible tsunami was rolling over the world. The crystalline spires didn't crumble, they simply ceased to be, their matter dissociating into fundamental particles. The architects didn't scream or run, they looked up at the sky, their faces etched with a profound, cosmic horror, and then they and their beautiful world were erased from existence. It wasn't violent. It was a quiet, absolute, and terrifying deletion. Silas was thrown back into his own mind, a raw, primal scream tearing from his throat. He scrambled away from the sphere, crab-walking backwards until his back hit the cold metal of the far wall. The beauty, the peace, it was all just the prelude to the horror. This wasn't a history lesson. It was a warning. Warden. Get me a channel to the nearest system authority. Priority 1. Emergency. Warden, Comms are offline, Silas. All channels are being subjected to an unidentified, high-gain jamming field. Silas, what? Reroute. Boost the signal. Warden, I am unable to comply. The jamming field appears to be originating from, inside the stargazer. Silas stared at the omen sphere, now dark and silent in the center of the room. It was isolating him. It wouldn't let him call for help. It hadn't finished its story. A cold dread, far deeper than any fear of creditors, settled into his bones. There was more to the warning. And the sphere was going to make sure he saw it. For days, Silas was a prisoner on his own ship, held captive by the silent, telepathic will of the artifact. He tried to disable it, to encase it in lead shielding, but any attempt was met with a wave of psychic feedback that left him writhing on the floor. The sphere demanded his attention. It showed him the harmonic cascade again and again, from a dozen different perspectives across the architect's doomed empire. He saw fleets of ships erased in mid-flight, colonies on distant moons vanishing in the blink of an eye. He was forced to bear witness to the full, horrifying scope of the extinction event. He understood now. The architects hadn't been destroyed by war or plague. They were erased by a fundamental law of the cosmos, a cyclical wave that swept galaxies clean, like a tide scouring a beach. They hadn't seen it coming until it was too late. But their final, desperate act was to create these spheres, these echo chambers of their existence, and cast them out into the void, hoping another race might find them. A warning in a bottle, thrown into the cosmic ocean. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of recycled horror, the sphere gave him the final piece of the message. He was floating in a sea of stars. It was a map. A map of the galaxy. A glowing red line traced the path of the last harmonic cascade. And a second, brighter line showed the path of the next one. It pulsed with malevolent light, a death sentence aimed at a small, unassuming spiral arm of the galaxy. Silas felt his blood run cold as the map zoomed in. He saw familiar constellations, familiar names. And there, directly in the path of the oncoming wave, was a small, yellow star. Labeled, Soul. His home. The vision wasn't over. A single, faint blue line branched off from the main map, leading to a turbulent, chaotic nebula. A safe harbor. A set of coordinates appeared in his mind, burned there with the same certainty as the image of Earth. A place where the wave would be dampened, where... Warning. Unidentified vessel approaching. They are hailing. The vision shattered. Silas was back in his cockpit, sweat-drenched and shaking. On his screen, a battered, heavily armed salvage ship, the Vulture, was closing fast. He knew its captain, a ruthless brute named Rorik. Stargazer, power down your engines. My deep-range sensors picked up a massive energy bloom from your position. Whatever you found, Silas, you're going to share it. Rorik thought he'd found a weapon, a power source. He had no idea what the sphere's energy signature truly meant. Silas looked from Rorik's ship to the star chart still burned into his mind. The countdown had begun. The wave was coming. His personal problems, his debts, Rorik, they were all meaningless motes of dust in the face of the oncoming storm. He ignored Rorik's hail. Instead of powering down, he slammed his fists onto the console, diverting all auxiliary power to the main drive. The Stargazer, old and weary, shuddered in protest. Warden, engine core temperature rising above safety limits. Silas, forget the limits. Get us to these coordinates. Now. He fed the safe harbor coordinates into the navigation computer. The Stargazer leaped forward, a desperate flight from a ghost ship towards a ghost of a chance. Behind him, the Vulture opened fire. The next hour was a blur of chaos. Silas pushed the Stargazer through the graveyard of giants, using the colossal debris as cover. He wasn't a pilot, but he knew the graveyard's contours like the back of his hand. He dodged and weaved, the Vulture's weapons fire searing the space behind him. All the while, the sphere in his cargo bay remained silent, its message delivered. Then, something changed. The stars themselves began to waver, as if seen through a heat haze. A strange, prismatic light shimmered at the edge of his vision. Warning. Unprecedented gravitational and quantum fluctuations detected. It was here. The harmonic cascade. It wasn't a wave of fire or radiation. It was a ripple in spacetime, silent and absolute. He saw a massive, kilometers-long piece of architect wreckage simply dissolve into shimmering dust as the ripple passed over it. Behind him, Rorik's ship, the Vulture, was still in pursuit, still firing. Its crew would have seen the same ripple, but they would have had no context, no warning from a ghost civilization. Silas watched on his rear monitor as the wave touched the Vulture. There was no explosion. No fire. The ship and everyone on it simply ceased to exist, erased from reality as if they had never been. The wave was gaining on him. He could feel it now, a tingling pressure on his skin, a disorienting sense of vertigo as the laws of physics began to fray around his ship. He slammed the FTL drive activation button. The drive whined, a sound of tearing metal and tortured energy, a sound it was never meant to make. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The shimmering wave was just meters from his stern. Then, with a gut-wrenching lurch, the stars outside the viewport elongated into streaks of light. The stargazer had jumped, outrunning the end of the world by a fraction of a second. Silas was thrown against his restraints. The ship came out of FTL with a shuddering groan, its main power dead. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows in the silent cockpit. Outside, there were no stars. Only the swirling, incandescent gases of the nebula the sphere had shown him. The safe harbor. He was alive. Adrift, crippled, but alive. He made his way to the cargo bay. The Omen sphere was dark and cold once more. It felt like nothing more than a piece of polished rock. Its energy was spent. Its message was delivered. He was alone. The last man to know the truth. The last man to have seen the architect's final echo. For hours, he worked, rerouting power, jury-rigging the comms system. Finally, a single green light blinked on. This is Silas, of the vessel Stargazer. This is not a distress call. This is a warning. And a message of hope. I am transmitting a data packet. It contains the history of a race you know as the Architects, and a star chart. A chart to a safe harbor. The harmonic cascade is real. Sol system has been lost. But we are not the first to face this. And we are not the last. He sent the message, the sphere's entire legacy, out into the silent void. He expected no reply. He was just one man, shouting into the darkness. He leaned back, the weight of 1,000,000 years of history and an unimaginable future settling upon him. He was no longer a salvager. He was a messenger. A survivor, then, through the static, a voice. Faint, distorted, and distinctly non-human, but it was there. Receiving. We are, survivors, of the last echo. We see you. You are not alone. More signals began to appear on his console. Faint lights, blinking into existence from the depths of the nebula. Other ships. Other survivors, each led here by their own Omen sphere, their own echo of a past extinction. Silas stared, a slow smile spreading across his weary face. He had lost his home. But here, in the ghost light of the nebula, surrounded by the last survivors of a dozen fallen worlds, he had found a new one. Humanity was not gone. It was just part of a larger, more ancient story. A story of survival, of echoes, and of new beginnings in the dark.